I remember waking up every day at 4:30 in the morning to go on my daily run. It was the only way I could fit in my workout routine while still balancing a full-time job and school. I had to be strategic with my time, so I would always start my run around 5:30, just as the sun was beginning to rise. One day, I decided to take a different route, just to switch things up. Instead of running through the streets, I chose to go through a nice park near my neighborhood. I had never seen anyone in the park before, at this time of day, so I thought it would be a nice change of scenery. As I was running, I noticed something moving in the distance. At first I thought it was an animal, but as I got closer, I realized it was a person. I couldn't make out their face, but they seemed to be wearing a white dress that flared out at the bottom. My curiosity got the best of me, so I decided to jog closer to the person to see who it was. As I approached them, I could see that it was an old lady wearing a wedding dress. She was standing near the edge of the park, staring out into the distance. I was surprised to see someone dressed like that at this time of day, so I decided to approach her and ask if she was okay. But as I got closer, I noticed that her eyes were fixated on something that wasn't there. I called out to her, but she didn't respond. This made me feel uneasy, so I quickly jogged away and continued my run. After my run, I went to work as usual, but I still couldn't shake the image of the old woman in the park. Something about her just made me want to go back and talk to her. Maybe I felt guilty. I told my coworkers about what I saw, and they told me there was a nursing home nearby, suggesting that the woman might have wandered out of the home and gotten lost. The more I thought about it, the more sense it all made. So the next day, at the same time, I went back to the park to look for her. I looked around forever and finally found her sitting on a park bench. I sat down beside her and she turned to look at me, a confused expression on her face. I introduced myself and asked her if she was lost. She told me her name was Margaret and she'd been looking for her husband. She said he'd passed away recently and that she was lost without him. This made me feel really sad. She had put on her wedding dress and come to the park to look for him. I told her to wait by the bench and I'd go call her husband, while I was actually just going to call a nurse from the nursing home. After a 5-minute walk to the nursing home, I told one of the nurses a lady named Margaret was sitting on the bench in the park and explained everything to her. The nurse went on to tell me that Margaret had passed away the day before at 5:45 a.m., right around the time I was on my morning run. But if she had passed away, who was I talking to? Who did I see the day before? I left the nursing home and I ran back to the bench. When I got there, she was gone. I searched and searched, but there was no sign of her. Did I actually talk to a ghost? This story goes back to when I was still working as a physical therapist in Cincinnati. I woke up early, as I usually do on Saturdays, and I headed to the park for my morning run. The sun was barely up, but the sky was already starting to turn blue. It was going to be a nice day. I was feeling good and had a lot of energy. It was pretty important in my profession to stay healthy, and a morning run always seemed to do the trick. It was a bit chilly, and the mist was making everything look dreamy and kind of mysterious. I started my run on the path, which was a straight mile-long stretch with no curves. It was an easy path with a few trees here and there, but nothing that could block my view. I hadn't seen anyone in the park for about half an hour, and I was really enjoying the solitude. Then I heard footsteps coming from behind me. At first I thought it was probably just another runner, maybe someone who was faster than me, but as I turned around to look, there was no one there. The footsteps continued, and I started to feel a little uneasy. I couldn't see anyone, and the footsteps were getting closer and closer. I turned back around and kept running, trying to ignore the sound of the footsteps, but they wouldn't go away. They kept advancing until I could practically feel the presence of whoever was making them. I was starting to panic, and I wondered if I should turn around again, but then the footsteps stopped. I stopped as well and turned around to see if I could see anything. But still, there was nothing there. No one. Not even a deer or any other animal. I was completely alone. I felt a shiver run down my spine, and I started to run back the other way, hoping I could get away from whatever it was that had been following me. I didn't want to look back again, but I couldn't help it. I turned around one last time and saw something move in the mist. It was just a shadow, but it looked like a person. I couldn't tell who it was or what they were wearing. But I knew I didn't want to stick around to find out. I ran faster than ever, with my heart pounding in my chest. When I got back to my car, I was shaking with fear. I didn't know what had just happened, but I knew that I never wanted to experience it again. To this day, I still don't know what it was that was following me that morning. Maybe it was just my imagination, or maybe it was something else entirely. All I know is that I never run in that part of the park anymore. I stick to the more populated areas, where I know I'm not alone. I've always enjoyed running at night. There's something about the darkness that made everything seem more peaceful and serene. Not as many people either. And the abandoned railroad track near my house was always a favorite route of mine. It was quiet and offered a nice long stretch for nightly jogs. I mean, it was a perfect track, which started from right outside my house and ended at a Baskin-Robbins, so I'd always get ice cream after. Kind of counterproductive, I know. The story I'm about to tell you took place on a chilly night in late October. I put on my running shoes and headed out the door around 10. I started my run and everything was as it should be. The stars were out, the wind through the trees. It was a perfect autumn evening. I made my way down the old railroad track, and it was quiet, as it always was. But this evening, it felt extra quiet. I got close to the spot where the track curved around the bend when I heard a faint whistle in the distance. I thought it was odd, considering this track hadn't been used in years. But then I heard it again, only this time it was closer. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and it wasn't the cold. I picked up my pace, my heart was pounding, and I looked over my shoulder. That's when I saw it, a train coming straight for me. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before. A long, black locomotive with no headlights barreling down the tracks with a deafening roar. The train was ancient. It looked like it had been abandoned for years, but it was moving too fast for something that had been stationary for that long. I stopped. I was paralyzed with fear. I couldn't move. I was going to be hit by the train. In the nick of time, I managed to move off the track, and as the train went by, I saw faces in the windows. They were all smiling, but they weren't happy smiles. They looked insane. Their eyes were wide open. Not just open, bugged out, huge, and they were staring at me. The train went by so quickly, but for some reason, I can still see the faces clearly in my mind. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the train vanished into the mist. I stood there trying to catch my breath, heart racing, wondering if it was all real or just a figment of my imagination. I had never believed in ghosts or the supernatural, but there was no explanation for what I'd just seen. The rest of my run was a blur. I was so shaken up, I couldn't think straight. When I got home, I was covered in sweat, out of breath, and not just from the run. It took me quite a while to calm down. To this day, sometimes, when I'm asleep, I wake up in a cold sweat after having a nightmare about that train. If you thought these stories were scary, then make sure you watch this next video here if you really want to be scared.